All right. So this is July the 12th, or as the song says, the 12th of never. Um, Today, we will be talking about basically, we're going to talk about the middle path, but the question was about anicca, dukkha, anatta, the three characteristics. Scott asked, maybe he'll be joining us very soon, and we'll start off talking about that. Now, we have recently talked about anicca, dukkha, anatta um, in the context of what is there in the suttas, but I would like to mention first off that anicca, dukkha, anatta is not a primary teaching of the Buddha, that it's secondary and fits in with his primary teaching, and that's an important point, that the Buddha said most specifically and in several places that he only teaches dukkha, dukkha, nirodha, and if you unpack that, in English would be dissatisfaction and the elimination of dissatisfaction, that satisfaction is a prime target, and that anicca, dukkha, anatta does mention dukkha, but it doesn't really mention dukkha nirodha, rather than it uses the term anatta, that if you can see that there is no self, that that should be the elimination of dukkha. Now, the actual teachings of the Buddha that go through the Four Noble Truths and most specifically the Eightfold Noble Path and the way that we will practice. In fact, you could say that the Buddha's method of how to remove dukkha is the Eightfold Noble Path, and most specifically, in detail, anapanasati, with changing our unwholesome thoughts into wholesome thoughts, to change the mind by gladdening the mind states, and to bring on a state of sukha, which is a feeling state that has the quality of being safe and secure, also comfortable, and most importantly, then satisfied, which then leads us to a state of success, which leads to more success, which would be the feeling of being wealthy with the Dhamma, all the way up to being the lion, which is known as the Buddha was known as a lion, and that comes from that ability to change the mind using the right noble effort to make changes based upon observation. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So let's talk about anicca, dukkha, anatta from that perspective, the what is called the three characteristics, because it is true, and he does talk about it even in the Anapanasati Sutta, that everything is changing, everything is falling apart. But that leads then to changing, falling apart, and dying out, leads to relinquishment or letting go, or actually changing our mind states to where there is actually an alternate practice. The alternate practice started in Burma. I hear from ChatGPT about the time of 1880 with Ledi Sayadaw and eventually Uba Khin. They called it Vipassana, and that the idea is that the lay people in Burma were not practicing anything at all, and so it was given for lay people to practice. So when lay Westerners came to Burma, that's the practice that they were given. Okay. Now, a summation of that practice that is called vipassana. It's also called insight meditation. It's also called mindfulness meditation. Is actually then based upon this three characteristics, with the idea that the student starts to note what's in the mind, but he doesn't change it. He keeps noting and noting, and that gives rise then, uh, through their correct practice, uh, uh, to, to disintegration. The things fall apart. And by disintegration, then the student will go through a phase of fearfulness, disgust, meaninglessness, despair, anguish. And when that despair gets deep enough, then they will, if they're practicing this method correctly, go into a state of redoubling then their effort and start practicing the Eightfold Noble Path. Well, the Buddha teaches to do the Eightfold Noble Path and the Four Noble Truths directly and immediately. You don't have to spend 20 years going into deep meditation. And so, uh, what I'm actually referring to is um, a, a work called The 16 Stages of Insight that was at first published in the Visuddhimagga and the how do we say it? Pasasimbudimagga, something like that. Sorry, there's an older work that it has some parts of it, but it didn't come into full 16 sketches until the Visuddhimagga. So this method, this practice with these anicca, dukkha, anatta, does not have key ingredients, and those key ingredients are actually built into the Eightfold Noble Path. So it's kind of interesting that they would actually change the teachings of the Buddha. They also call it dry. Now, what they mean by dry is that it has no juiciness to it. It doesn't have any of the gladdening of the mind. It doesn't have any of the joy that is recommended by the Buddha. And it's a dry practice. It also has the quality of not being a middle path. It's kind of an extreme. And it's important to talk about it in the sense that of the middle path. The middle path of the Buddha is to not go to one extreme or the other, but to stay kind of in the middle ground. And so, one example of that is you can see that I'll use Christianity first. Christianity has the mercy of Jesus, the forgiveness of Jesus, the love of Jesus. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And you can see that as part of the Christian doctrine. However, they are kind of bound up in the idea of what they call sin, and the idea is to um, hate the sin and to love the sinner. Yet they don't love the sinners. In fact, they don't love anybody who doesn't wear the same hat that they wear. And so we can see then that Christianity is kind of a duality that's stuck between love and hate. But it goes back and forth between those two extremes. You can also see that that's true in Islam, except that they tend to hang out in the hate and don't go to the mercy of Allah very often, but it stays at the extremes. So this Vipassana practice that is based upon the three characteristics actually is in that realm of an extreme. Now, one of the things that is often mentioned within the teachings of the Buddha, that his teachings are good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end. And yet you will see that the Vipassana practice doesn't get good. Not as long as you're practicing their method. You have to change to the actual Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path, which is stated in step 12 of the 16. And so the recommendation would be is to forget the first 11 steps of the 16 stages of insight from the Visuddhimagga. Just forget all about it because it goes to extreme. And so let's start practicing the middle way from the very beginning. Now, the whole idea of anatta is not that there is no self, but rather that the word atta is not translated correctly as self. It's actually best translated as soul in the sense of the Atman, or the soul that never changes. That many people in Vipassana, when they hear that anatta means no self, then they get the idea of, well, what is the self? Who am I? Does the self change, or is it fixed? And the better way of looking at it is that sometimes you feel selfish, and sometimes you feel altruistic, that you're not a fixed target, you're moving around. Let us say then that when you're practicing correctly, there is no selfishness, there's no self there. But when we get forgetful, not remembering to practice, then our nature goes back to the trauma that we have been living in all of our lives. Now, I would like to mention something about that, and that is that the way that children are raised in Thailand, I don't see any of our Thai friends on here to verify this, but my experience in Thailand is that the babies will sleep with the family in the same bed. Now, I know that there is a Bible verse where a woman slept with her baby, rolled over on it, and killed it. And so she substituted her dead baby for another woman's baby. And so that leaves Christianity then with that scripture to put the baby in a bassinet or a crib or something that's maybe close to the bed or even in another room. So, have you ever heard of the concept of a baby crying itself to sleep? Christy, have you heard that? Of a baby
Yes,
crying
I have.
itself to sleep?
Yes.
Okay. How about you, Harold? Have you heard the concept of a baby crying itself to sleep?
I've heard the phrase, but I've never thought about it, like soothing itself to sleep.
Well, not soothing, but crying itself to sleep.
Like tiring itself out, I guess.
Yeah, crying. So the baby is crying. I have actually been in a situation to see that a baby is crying and crying and crying, and the parents don't know what to do. And so because they don't like the baby crying and crying and crying, they'll put it off into a bassinet. They may even put it alone in another room. And so the baby will cry it out, get tired, and go to sleep. To where in Thailand, the baby will be comforted, it will be nourished, it will be held by the mother or the daddy, and then they will go to bed, go to sleep. But it's not really sleep because they're really paying attention to the infant, and the infant then being held and nurtured will eventually go to sleep. Now, my question then, Santiago, would be, which would you rather have? Would you rather be put to bed in another room or in a bassinet and let the family just let you cry it out? Or would you rather be held and nurtured while you're crying?
I think I'd rather be held, but
Okay.
mostly because I know that it's needed psychologically speaking.
Mm-hmm. So
Because
you
if
could
not,
say,
it's like the
go ahead.
wire monkey mom thing. The study.
Pardon? What was that?
It was like those studies they did with the wire monkeys, where it's like the monkeys have like a mom, but it's a fake mom. If they don't
That's
have that, at the very least, then they will like just they'll rot away. They'll die.
right, exactly. And yet in Western culture, that's what we do to our children, is that we push them away rather than holding on to them and letting them cry out. All right. So that kind of trauma that the infant will be carried on into our adult lives, in the sense that we will do that. We will, let us say, be in a state of crying it out. We may not be actually making noises and having tears, but we cry it out without giving ourselves any nourishment, any nurturing at all. That also would be when people are doing the Vipassana practice of the noting, that it's dry, that fits in with the Western mentality of just putting up with it and being in a state of dukkha without having that nurturing to hold us. So the Buddha's actual method is that middle path, that we can't slap the kid into being quiet, but we can hold them and nurture them, just like we can continue to hold our own mind. Even I've heard the students say, well, I've gladdened the mind, but I don't feel gladdened. Well, that just means that he's just gone back into the dukkha, rather than saying, I'll keep saying it, I'll keep going, I'll keep nurturing the self, I'll keep going that way. And pretty soon, we begin to feel better because we can talk ourselves into it. Now, what we can say then is that when we are in a state of deprivation, when we're in a state of crying, when we're in a state of dukkha, that dukkha is kind of like a prod or a poking, and we keep poking ourselves out and being uncomfortable. That the actual practice of the Buddha is to um, stop poking and learn to be gentle, learn to be quiet, um, to be able to settle down. So, if we gladden the mind, brighten the mind, cheer the mind up, that will stop the poking. And by gladdening the mind and cheering up the mind, the stopping of the poking, stopping having those unwholesome thoughts, will then allow the mind to rest, to lay in peace. And so, this duality of vipassana and samatha, the suttas that do talk about it in the sense of one has to have both. But the reality in the sutras is that we need to develop samatha, and that we develop samatha by noting, by looking, and by changing. And so we have to change the mind to get it into a nice state, so that it then can settle down, so that we really can see clearly. And this is what Vipassana is missing. And so it doesn't matter how much time people will spend with the three characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anatta, that really, without the gladdening of the mind, they will, in fact, keep poking and prodding until they get themselves kind of all worked up. There's no nurturing there. And so this is not the teaching of the Buddha. Now, in Thailand, they've got a slightly different issue when the monks would say, oh, only the monks can practice samadhi. Then, in fact, that's what the practice is called in the Thai language, is samadhi. And samadhi actually means unification of mind, which is actually backwards from what is referred to in Vipassana as disintegration. Things fall apart in Vipassana, but with the gladdening the mind, that glue, that juiciness, tends to bring the mind together into cohesion, even though everything is changing. And so we practice to be free from dukkha, to where the practice of anicca, dukkha, anatta is left with a whole lot of dukkha as part of the practice. It's not good in the beginning. It's really not good in the middle. And I don't think anybody ever gets to the end with that practice. They've got to change that practice into being able to quieten the mind, gladden the mind, brighten the mind, and get it into a state of samatha. Now, you could actually say that the word samatha is directly associated with the first jhana. That the first jhana requires, if one is going to be practicing the first jhana, that we apply the mind to the wholesome and continue to sustain it in the wholesome, so that as the wholesome thoughts begin to change our attitude, it also begins to change the way that we feel into the feeling of everything is okay. There is no problems, which means now that we can begin to feel safe. Also, the practice has to do with making the body comfortable, to where the Vipassana, they want you to sit for long, long periods of time, making the body exactly uncomfortable. And then the idea is that, oh, you need to practice being uncomfortable so that you can get used to it. How many of you here have gotten used to being uncomfortable? Ben, have you gotten used to being uncomfortable?
No need to get used to it. Just move and feel comfortable.
Yes, in fact, we need to get used to being comfortable, to be safe and secure and comfortable, because only through comfort of the body, the feeling of safety and security, the feeling of gladdening the mind and changing the attitude, that's the only way that we can bring about that state of satisfaction. Now, another thing that you will find in the Visuddhimagga that the Vipassana people have, at least some of them, go into. Now, Goenka's method doesn't have any walking meditation at all, but the Visuddhimagga talks about walking very slowly, so that in the beginning of the practice, you are aware of your feet in the sense of lifting, moving the foot, then planting it down, and then changing or shifting the weight of the body. Now, by doing that, they want you to practice over and over again, just to watching the body move. And then it's almost up to 7 steps, so that you have the raising of the foot, but still touching the ground, and then bringing the foot up, and then changing its position, moving the foot forward, setting it down on the toes, and then finally resting on the heel, and then shifting the posture. Now, that's actually a kind of a focus meditation. And you can see that when somebody is practicing walking meditation that way, they're leaving out quite a lot. They're overly focused on the body. That a better way of doing walking meditation itself would be the ability to walk slowly, watch where you're going, but also watch where the mind is going. That this is actually a good time to brighten or gladden the mind. And what will happen for most people who are not actually practicing walking, but just walking, is that they'll get distracted by all kinds of things. Get distracted by the neighbors in the neighbor's house, get distracted by advertisements and signs and all of that kind of stuff. And they wind up stepping on something because they're not watching where they're going. But if you're practicing walking meditation correctly, it's best to watch where your mind is going while you're watching where your feet are going. And when I say while, I'm not talking about instantaneously, simultaneously, but rather moving back and forth. That the walking meditation is a moving meditation as opposed to sitting still, and that we want to practice it so that we integrate the body, the feelings, and the mind while walking. That in fact, walking is actually quite relaxing as compared to sitting for long periods of time. So I don't recommend sitting for long periods of time, nor do I recommend walking in such a way that removes some of the aspects of the four foundations of mindfulness. So when you're out walking in meditation, you're aware of how you feel, you're aware of the thoughts that you have, and you also have the ability to change those thoughts so that you can actually practice anapanasati while walking. That this would be the way of thinking of it instead of doing a walking meditation that is, let us say, in the style of the Vipassana people. Do it in the style of anapanasati so that we're gladdening the mind with every step. We're having fun in our walking. We're watching the ground mostly. The idea is to keep the eyes on the ground about, they say 2 bow lengths. Now, a bow can be considered a meter, so we're thinking about 2 meters or about 6 feet ahead. Start watching where you're going just in time. So if you happen to walk and you're walk up to a snake, stop and let the snake do whatever the snake wants. That in fact the snake probably doesn't want to be any closer to you than you are to it, and so it's just going to notice that you're there and then slink on off, thereby giving you the path. So don't step on a snake. And that's possible when people just step on a snake when they're not watching where they're going. Step on rubble, step on nails, step on sticky vines and thorns, all kinds of things that we can step on when we're not watching where we're going. Now, the Western mentality would be, okay, well, I'm going to get a set of clodhoppers. I'm going to get some really big, heavy boots. We'll get army boots. But in the time of the Buddha, they actually practice mostly barefoot. And so, if you're going to practice walking meditation, the best way for you to watch where you're going is by walking barefoot, both mentally and with the bare feet. What do I mean by walking mentally barefoot? That means letting our thoughts be exposed so that we can see what we're thinking, we can see what we're feeling, so that we have a chance of being able to change that. So, this would be the walking meditation that we can actually practice that has great benefit, great fruit, because it's actually part of the anapanasati. Now, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa actually confronted the Sangha in Bangkok by saying that the Buddha only taught one practice, and that one practice was the Eightfold Noble Path and Anapanasati. Now, there are other things like anicca, dukkha, anatta. Another one would be, let us say, contemplation of ugliness, a Shobha meditation. We can also have contemplation of death, the Marana, or we can even have contemplation of the metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha. But we can say that, in fact, that those are not the practice that the Buddha recommended. That's something to look at, to think about, to contemplate while you are not actually gladdening the mind. That the actual practice is to gladden the mind, to keep the mind focused, but not focused on one object, but rather to focus on what's happening right here, right now, in relationship to your body, your feelings, the mind states, and also the mind objects, which, by the way, keep changing. The fastest thing that changes over and over and over again is not out in the world. What really changes so fast is the mind itself. It's constantly in motion, and that's especially true when we keep poking the mind with dissatisfying thoughts. That the mind will, in fact, settle down and become stable if we start practicing anapanasati to focus and gladden the mind. However, this practice of the Buddha is quite minor in the various practices that you find in the West. That most of the Western practices have to do with this, what they call vipassana, without actually bringing about this state of mind that is gentle, almost passive, but certainly stable. The stable state of mind, just like an infant who would be laying in bed. The infant may be hungry, he may have a tummy ache or something like that, but at least he's being nurtured. And so the infant will go to sleep easily because he feels that he's being taken care of, as opposed to feel like he's being isolated. So this is something that we can, in fact, begin to add to our practice, is that feeling of you're with your friends, you're with your absolute best friend. Your friend is there to nurture you. And who is that best friend? Would be the mommy that you have inside, your own motherly instinct to mother yourself, to gently take care of yourself, to rock yourself to sleep, basically. This is the way of practicing anapanasati through the idea of gladdening the mind, nurturing the mind, instead of being critical. So that would be an important point, then, of the distinction between the vipassana practice and the actual practice of the Buddha. Is that people who are practicing vipassana are often, almost intentionally, critical and hard on themselves. They're expected to get some value out of it, and all they get is more dissatisfaction. More and more and more dissatisfaction. Yeah, they can see what the mind is doing, but the mind is still in a state of dissatisfaction because they're not taking the right noble effort to actually change the mind, to brighten the mind, to nourish the mind, to um, uh, to bond with the mind, to become unified and whole. But in fact, this is what the word samadhi actually means. It actually means to become whole. Now, What we then need to do is to recognize that even Thailand has been invaded by this Vipassana practice, but Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is quite clear that it's the full practice includes the Anapanasati Sutta, and that in fact the Buddha never taught a practice called Vipassana. He never taught a practice called mindfulness or insight. That what he taught was the complete full practice of, especially the entire major point is about gladdening the mind, brightening the mind, bringing the mind out of the dukkha, out of the poking that the dukkha does with the dissatisfaction, and bring the mind into a state of peace and relaxation. That relaxed state of mind is then what we would also call samatha, to where the mind is bright and shiny and able to see very clearly and has that state of safe, secure, comfortable, and satisfaction. We keep practicing that and we begin to get the attitude of, well, I can do this. And that leads into other aspects of the practice, that willingness to take charge, to be on top of your own world, to be your own to be your own boss, because you have that confidence. That we have to build that confidence through success. And the success that we build is that success of brightening the mind, gladdening the mind, and bringing the mind out of the state of dukkha into the state of safe, secure, comfortable, and satisfaction. You keep doing that. That's what is called sukha. As you've heard me say before, sukha, the Pali word sukha, is exactly opposite of the word dukkha. So when you're in a state of sukha, you've already gotten what the Buddha was all about. That's really all he taught, was to come out of that state of dukkha. And yet, Western Buddhism, being highly influenced by Vipassana, has added a lot of Western culture to it. So, metta would be referenced correctly by just saying, if you are kind to yourself, then you can be kind to others. And that we are kind to them, and that's all. But it's not loving kindness. That a loving has to do with attachment. One student just recently talked about NVC, nonviolent communication, and pointed out that there's always a way of doing nonviolent communication to talk to somebody, without recognizing that if you're nonviolent all the time, that gives them the full opportunity to be violent all they want. That in fact, if the Buddha allowed that, but if the Buddha was nonviolent all the time in his communication, then I don't think that the Sangha would have lasted. But rather, there would be a time when he would actually put his foot down. There are several suttas where it talks about him being quite critical of monks because they're not getting the proper training. They're still clinging to their old ways and their old ideas. There's also the Kasi, the horse trainer sutta, where the Buddha actually says that if the horse or the student does not take on the training, then we can dispose of them. We can ostracize them or kill the horse. Now, the killing of the horse is actually a metaphor for throwing somebody. Let us say we on Discord, we can ban them or we can block them if they're not doing the kind of posting that is wholesome and valuable. That if they keep posting trash, even though they've been warned, it's okay to ban them. That we want to keep our teaching correct and pure. We don't want to say, oh, well, we're nonviolent, so we're going to just let anybody post any kind of crap that they want to here, because then everybody else is listening to all of this crap and not actually hearing the teachings of the Buddha. So this place would be on Discord is the place to have noble Dhamma conversations. Now, that may not be the case for all of social media, but that's what we've decided that we're going to have here on this Discord channel, is that we're going to have only wholesome communication, that we're not going to allow people to bring up all kinds of other practices, especially those kind of practices which are, let us say, not middle path, that they're kind of an extreme. That one of them was and Vita. Let's see. Ivan, do you know what I'm talking about here? Somebody, let us say in the mod chat room, is talking about
Deep.
yeah, where that's an extreme practice. It's not really middle path, and you can see that it's the extreme because the whole practice is not bringing in that joy. It's not an actual middle ground and middle path. And so let us keep our practice on Discord wholesome and happy, because that's just the only channel that I know of where we actually have that as a feature of the channel, as opposed to let us say X or Twitter, which has the feature of any bullshit goes. It's all bullshit, so long as Elon Musk agrees with the bullshit. To where here we're only interested in having wholesome Dhamma. So I think that I've talked about most of the topics. We've talked about Ivan had brought up about social media. I would say offhand that social media in general is to be avoided, because most of social media is actually ordinary language, ordinary people speaking about ordinary things, which will poke and prod your own mind, keeping you from being at a state of peacefulness and relaxation. That is better, if you're going to do social media, to do the social media here on Discord that can keep the mind happy, wholesome, and peaceful. So let's see. We've talked several topics today. Errol, do you have any comment?
No, I mean, this was really good. Described a lot of what I went through before we met a couple of years ago. Your practice takes what's lacking in noting is the continuation, the unremittent part. By entering this version of jhana, you are mindful 24/7. So the skill develops much faster, much quicker, instead of you're sitting there for 45 minutes and then you're trying to come back the next day. That's what made a huge improvement. And to me, everything you're saying falls in the category of jhana. Once jhana is attained, then you see dukkha very clearly. Even when you're sleeping, yeah, or you wake up and I remember one time I woke up at 3 in the morning and my mind was just thinking all this stuff. I was like, oh, okay. So, well, calmed it down and fell back asleep. And it did it on its own. The only thing is, there's a marker for me where everything you're saying is achieved at first jhana, and then you maintain that, which builds unremitting mindfulness. In the sense of things not having a self, is there a marker for that? Is it the same as like the first jhana, where if you practice wholesomeness and good thoughts, the mind will settle, and first jhana, the conditions for it arise? Is something similar happens with the practice of not self?
Yes, I would say that the word, let us say the concept of self is not there all the time. An example, going back to the mother with her baby, that as long as the baby is crying and mom is holding the baby and rocking the baby and feeding the baby and doing what she's doing with the baby, there's no self there. But as soon as she has the thought, this kid won't shut up and I'm tired of it, that's when the selfishness comes in. Dads will more than likely become selfish about the baby's crying before the mom does, because the mom's got more of the motherly instinct. And so we could say that when we have that motherly instinct, even for ourselves, there's no selfishness there. But when we are, another way of talking about it is that when there is dukkha, when there is dissatisfaction, who is it that's dissatisfied? That if you look at the way that the Paticca Samuppada is set up, the Buddha says that in fact selfishness, or the self, is actually a requirement for the dukkha. It's who is being disappointed, who is being dissatisfied. And so when we're not dissatisfied, we're not in that state of selfishness. So I use the word selfishness because that's got a very good handle to it, because when you're being selfish. It's easier to see when you're selfish or not selfish, rather than is there a self or not. So if you can actually see and use the word selfishness, you'll be able to see it a whole lot better. Just use the word selfishness rather than self, because you can see that when you're selfish, that's because you're hurting. Here's an example, that the brother or close friend comes on the porch and asks for $500 loan. If you say, oh, $500, that's too much money. Oh, I don't have $500. And both people are being disappointed. Both people are being selfish. But if you say, yeah, I have $500, let's talk about repayment or whatnot like that, then both people can come to an agreement. Then there's joy and happiness. So it's almost, then you could say that when you say no, that's being selfish. And when you say yes, that's not being selfish. So when you go around saying no, 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 that's often being selfish. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is there self in, or selfish? There's no selfishness in first jhana because it'll pop you right out of it.
So when selfishness comes, jhana goes, it's gone.
Yeah.
Because now selfishness is back into unwholesome. So you can say that selfishness and unwholesome thoughts are basically the same thing. That unwholesome thoughts are in fact selfish thoughts. But when you have thoughts of everything is okay, everything is fine, not a problem in the world, then that's not selfish. Hang on a second. Hey, Mom. Tam. Pam! Mikey. Huh? Nobody's here. We've got postman outside. Can you go take care of it? Hang on a second.
Okay.
You guys want to talk about examples of when saying no would actually not be selfish?
No.
What you got? Go ahead. You go first.
No,
Oh,
I
no,
couldn't
you
think
go
of
first.
any, but I was like, there's got to be some. Maybe that's what I was outsourcing.
Yo, Eddie,
Yeah, what up,
spot me your
Santiago?
monthly paycheck right now from PayPal, dude.
Okay,
You need it.
sure, dude. Yeah, let's talk about reclaimment.
No, that's an example of when you wouldn't do that.
I know, I got you.
You know, if it's unreasonable. I mean, then why do you want the money too? Is like the other thing, I guess. I mean, so if your brother's asking you $500 because he needs to eat, then it's a whole nother thing, huh?
Does
I
the
guess
reason
if you wanted
matter?
to take care of
Go
yourself.
ahead. You guys take it from here.
Eddie, ask your questions again.
What were you saying, Santiago?
Oh, Eddie asked if anybody would like to give an example of when it would be okay to say no. And then, then
In regards to
somebody
selfishness.
asked Eddie to give an example, and then Eddie couldn't come up with one, and I told him, "Give me your whole monthly paycheck right now." And then he said, "Yeah," just in a sarcastic way. But then I'm thinking, and it's like one of the reasons is also why somebody wants the money.
Yeah.
If your brother's coming asking you $500 for liquor and stuff, then nah. But if it's for food or for something that they need, then for sure, no problem. But
Right. That's what I said. Now it can be discussed, but if you say automatically no, then there's no place to go with that. And both people are generally in a state of dissatisfaction. So Eddie, go ahead.
Oh, I said my piece.
I didn't hear it.
Unless you
Can
want
you
to. Oh, I just was asking a question. When is it wise to say no, and when would that be considered selfless or not selfish?
Well, an example would be when somebody says a bunch of bullshit. There's too much for you to even say anything. You can just say no.
Dhammarato,
You
is
know,
there a Sutta that reference selfishness as not self? Because I've never heard of that. That's very interesting. Makes a lot of sense. I just never heard of it that way.
no, I would say offhand that the word or the term selfishness was not a word that was used by the translators. I would also go to say that almost all translations and almost all translators were doing the translation out of the Pali into English in order to understand the Dhamma. That we don't have any translations that are done by people who do understand the Dhamma. In fact, those who do understand the Dhamma correctly, what's the point? There's already too many translations. And so the better thing to do, I think, is to teach people to be careful about reading the Pali translations, to actually begin to learn a little bit of the Pali. The example here would be anatta does not mean no self, it means no permanent existing soul. And so when one is dealing with the first fetter of personality view, what that really means is that they can come to the place of understanding that they are not fixed. You are not who you thought you were, because who you thought you were is changing on a regular basis. So when we begin to see that who you are is just a moving target, there's nothing fixed there, then in fact, this is where Nietzsche really makes a point, is that you are not fixed. And if you try to fix, that will be dissatisfying. But in fact, there's a lot of practices, especially out of Hinduism, that asks the question of who am I and what am I? And that's not ever going to give them any real satisfaction, because who they are is changing. This is actually out of the Sabbaasava Sutta number 2, where the Buddha says is that the right attentiveness or the right attention is to pay attention to the dukkha, the cause of dukkha, the salvation from or the removing of the dukkha, and the path that leads to that end of dukkha is where we want to pay attention, not to who we are. And so this group of people that are all bound up with anicca, dukkha, anatta, they're missing the point. The point is not anatta. The point is can you come out of your dissatisfaction? And if you dwell on who am I, and if you start dwelling on is there self or there is no self, that's only going to lead you to more dissatisfaction, because you can't figure out, basically you can't figure it out because it's not the right question. Who am I is not the right question. Then in fact the question arises because someone has already seen that they are not the same all the time. And so they're trying to look for some essence that's down below the changing without actually recognizing that they are the thing that is changing. And so it's important for us to recognize that anicca, dukkha, anatta, which is so important within the Vipassana meditation group, is not really the teaching of the Buddha. And it does not lead to the end of dukkha until they do come around to actually practicing the Eightfold Noble Path.
Dhammarato, in the heart of the Bodhi tree from Buddhadasa, that's why I was looking earlier for the translations. A big part of it was that he, noticed impermanence, or noticed not things not being mine, not being myself, and that had like a big impact on him. Like he saw it, and then he's like, "Oh, this is great." Is that supposed to
It's,
happen? Is that like
yeah, it's not me. That's the whole point. That's three. There was three talks that comprise that book. The book's title, by the way, is The Heartwood of the Bo Tree. That heartwood means that we're not looking at the leaves and sticks. You can actually then, with that analogy, see that anicca, dukkha, anatta is the branches and sticks. And the heart is dukkha, dukkha nirodha. And who is it that's dukkha-ing? Because there's nothing really there to dukkha, and so there is no dukkha. That there's nothing really to it. And so we're talking about the direction of approach. If you approach it from anicca, dukkha, anatta, you're going to wind up with just more dukkha. But if you approach it from the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path, practicing through anapanasati, of gladdening the mind, softening the mind, steadying the mind, that's when the real insight will come. That you cannot have vipassana without samatha, and you can't really have samatha without vipassana, and that's what's missing. In fact, they call it dry meditation. There's got no samatha in it. And so all they have is continue to poke the mind, keep poking until they go into a state of disaster. And so that's the Western Buddhist practice of vipassana is really not the teaching of the Buddha, but it will make a lot of money. So let's see. Navid, do you have anything to say?
Yes, sir. I have so much I'll take up the whole time. Um, sometimes you use these words, samatha, anicca, and all that, and I have to keep looking back because I can't remember 100% what it means. But how do you practice gladdening the mind while you're doing breath meditation? Is that what you were saying?
I wouldn't call it a meditation, that in fact you could go so far as to give the Vipassana crowd the word meditation. Now, the word
Mm-hmm.
meditation actually originally came from the Christians, and what it actually meant was cogitation, mulling stuff over,
Yeah.
looking, like, what is the Virgin Mary, and what is the Trinity? And so we could say then that contemplation would be reflections on death, or reflections on unwholesome, asubha, despicable, or metta. What is kindness? But that's not what the Buddha taught. That's meditation. What the Buddha taught was the practice of looking at the thoughts that you have and making changes to the thoughts you have to come out of the unwholesome into the wholesome, to come into basically reality itself. The reality is that everything is okay. The reality is everything is fine, not a problem in the world, because that's real, that you're
Mm-hmm.
actually already okay. But we have to practice it because we've fallen into the habit of seeing what's wrong with any and everything. And so we need to practice everything is all right until we begin to feel like everything really is okay, which means the feeling then would be a feeling safe and secure, that things are not dangerous. Everything is already okay. So this is the way to practice, is to practice feeling safe and secure, comfortable, satisfied, and we practice that way by using that kind of language of feeling safe. That's the language that we use. I'm okay. Everything is fine. Not a worry in the world. There is nothing dangerous here. And we keep practicing like that, and pretty soon we begin to feel like that. We also practice gladdening the mind in the sense of, I can handle this. Everything is all right, which means it is actually easy to handle. This is not too much. Life is actually quite easy when there's not too much work to do. So let's start seeing that there's not much work to do. There's nothing to it. Everything is easy. All right. And so this is the way that we practice. We practice being happy and wholesome. We practice being the ability to handle everything. That in fact we stop poking at ourselves. And because we stop poking, we can relax and be satisfied. This is the real practice. Does that make sense to you?
It does. It
Navid?
does. It does. Thank you. I don't know why this has to be repeated so much, but it really does.
It really does, because we're repeating dukkha much of the time. So we have to
Yes.
keep being reminded over and over again that everything actually is quite easy, quite comfortable, quite happy, not a problem in the world. Prasanna, what do you have to say?
The usual, everything is okay.
Everything is fine. All right. That's excellent. How about you, Ben? Do you have anything to say? How about you, Vad Oakland? Do you have something to add?
Just listening, thanks.
How about you, CV? Got something to say?
So I loved your question at the beginning about whether I've heard like the cry it out method. And I think I was caught off guard when you first asked me, because yes, I've heard, and yes, I've been told to let the kids cry it out. And so I liked that part of the talk, because it's very helpful to think about ourselves as the baby that needs to be nurtured. And I really appreciated that. That was that kind of a light bulb for me. So I appreciate it. Thank you. Great talk.
Excellent. Excellent. Yes. So you take care of yourself. You don't throw yourself in the crib to cry it out. You hold, you rock, you take care of everything is all right. Oh, sweet lullaby. Okay. So, anybody else got anything to say?
I
Dhammadas, you
will
have
say
something?
I will say one thing, Dhammarato, real quick. You make this very simple and very clear and very natural for something that is so profound and life altering. I think a long time ago you used to say you were born, the doctor smacked you in the butt, and then you started crying for 35 years until you met Ajahn Po, and that's when you, for the first time, you stopped crying, and you didn't even know you were crying.
Mm-hmm.
And this
Yes,
is a
and
super mundane.
what I got from Ajahn Po that I wish I could give to all of my students as clear as I got it from him was that he nurtured me. He cared about me. He was curious and interested in me. He wanted me to get to Dhamma. He nurtured me.
I'm glad he did. I don't know
Me
why I
too.
felt that I needed to say that, but I'm glad. Dhammarato, and thank you for the talk today. May
Yes.
I ask something quick as well? I know that was already a question, but earlier you mentioned, um, the Buddha himself was someone who was not just a NVC person, meaning like he wasn't always just non-violently communicating. He was someone, when he needed to, was critical. But he would have done that, I assume, and this is coming from someone who hasn't read a lot of the sutras. He would have done that in a state of satisfaction, I assume. How does one, how, I don't even know if I'm asking this in a way that makes sense, but when in a position where you are thinking it's good to criticize someone, but you also don't want to do that selfishly and from a state of safety, security, comfort, and satisfaction. How does that work really?
Actually, um, there were times when Achan Po was straight with me, hard on me. But the relationship had already been established. And so I was able to take his whacks from his Zen stick because I knew that he cared about me.
Okay.
That I
Got
was
any
on the
examples,
right path.
Dhammarato?
Okay. In the Patty Mork, a lot of the Patty Mork has to do with keeping the integrity of the Sangha. That there's several different points about how to criticize and not being critical of other monks. And so at one time, I made the point that there was another Western monk that did not know how to practice. He wasn't practicing. And that statement got back to Achan Po, and he sent a delegation of about 20 monks to come teach me that you do not criticize other monks. Now, that's kind of hard to do, to send 20 monks to criticize a monk for criticizing. It's a delicate kind of a balance, but that's the point is that that lesson was very, very strongly learned. That's why I rarely criticize individuals, but rather criticize what they're saying. So that was an important lesson that Achan Po delivered, and yet he wasn't there. But he sent that delegation. I'm sure that delegation just didn't happen spontaneously. He collected that group. There were other times when he would stand out in the yard of the kuti, not make any sound at all, just to see how long it took me to figure out that he was outside. Another thing that he would do is he would walk up behind me and kind of say something softly, not whisper, but just say something in passing, and then he was gone. The two things that he said most often were tatata, which means be here now, and the other one would be not sure. He would say, not sure, and I would look, oh, I see you. And pretty soon, he wasn't able to sneak up on me like that anymore. But I kept track of where Ajahn Po was, so that he wouldn't be able to sneak up on me. That gave a skill that I use often, a lot, to be aware of what's going on around you, to not be stuck in some deep meditation, but rather to be aware of when things are and what's around, to not let the senses get blocked.
Would you
So,
take your daughter's phone when she wasn't looking?
no, I
As
didn't
part
take.
of
Oh,
paying attention?
well, she wasn't looking, but she was right there. Yeah, I used to tease her with that. Now I don't tease her much anymore. She's older. But when she was young, uh, if she'd set the phone down and I'd grab it. And then I stopped doing that mainly because she was alert when I would come. I would tickle her toes. And when she started putting her feet under the cover, when she saw me coming, I knew that she had learned the lesson that I was teaching her. To be alert, to be awake, to don't get lost in the cell phone. I think once or twice I actually walked up to her while she was using the cell phone and just take it right out of her hand because she wasn't paying any attention. But then I couldn't do that anymore because she saw me coming up. She would hold on to that phone. She'd change its location. She'd make sure that I couldn't just grab it from her. So she was learning. That's Dhamma. Pay attention. Now, naturally, I'd give it right back to her. I mean, I wasn't robbing her of the phone or putting her in a bad state. But that was years ago. I'm surprised you remember that. All right. So does anybody else have anything? Santiago, you have any last words?
No.
Dhammadasa, do you have any last words?
No, just thank you for the talk.
All right. Ivan, how about you? You have any last words?
No, this is so enjoyable. Thank you.
And I'm glad that we have such an enjoyable time together. So, Mikey, why don't you take this thing home?
Yeah, sure thing. One of our members had commented that they hadn't been seeing the YouTube videos on their YouTube homepage. So if you're watching us on YouTube, there's a few things you can do to ensure that you see the Dhammarato YouTube video. For one, you can hit that subscribe button, and you can also hit the bell button to be notified of when a new video comes out. And then also you can like these videos and comment on them, and that'll increase the likelihood that you'll see them in your YouTube feed. Also, these talks are available to listen to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever your podcasting platform is. And if you'd like to come join us here on the Discord, on the Dhammara's Discord, there's a link in the YouTube description. And you can set up a one-on-one call with a seasoned practitioner. Just put down a day and time and come make some noble friends. It's a good time. We've got some one-on-one calls going on today, in fact. So yeah, thank you, friends, for being here.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you,
It was
So,
Dhammarato.
great.
Thank you.